Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm starting a series on cactus houseplants, specifically how I use them and how I create them for my slow stitching. In today's class, I'll show you how I create a prickly pear cactus, just a fabric page that I can add to a book or embellish further. What I want to do is capture the details that make this structure and this subject so unique. And that would be the prickly pear cactus. I'm taking advantage of the colors, the prickly little stems that we always think of when we think of a cactus, and then those beautifully colored fruits, which are called tuna, on the prickly pear cactus. They come in a variety of colors, from reds to yellows, but I'm going to go with a fuchsia, just to make it stand out and make the colors really pop. I like to use bright colors, but other people like to use earth tones and more tones that are more naturally found in nature. I like to take advantage of some of the bright colors found with cactus and then enhance them further. So I use very bright fabrics and bright thread to that effect. So let's get started. So I had this little sampler that I made of different types of cactus, particularly the ones that are potted, so they're houseplants. I just think they're so beautiful with the combinations of colors, with the bright pots, and then the various shades of green for the actual cactus. Today's class, we're going to make one that is not here, similar to this one though. We're going to make a prickly pear cactus. So it's going to be a little bit of a combination of a cactus with a little flower, which in this case is going to be the fruit, the pear, what they call a tuna, which is beautiful colors, usually a very beautiful pink. And we'll have the paddle-shaped leaves. And then we'll have the little whiskers, the little stems here. So it's really a simple piece, so you can really embellish it with as many stitches as you'd like, or you can add a collage background. Now this is just a guide, and eventually I'll show all of this cactus in various videos. But let's get started with our prickly pear cactus. So I always start by figuring out what size I want my background to be. And here I just have something that's maybe 5 by 7. And again, it's a piece of quilted fabric because I like the feel of stitching through that. Use whatever you like. If you like to use an embroidery hoop or different fabrics or flannel, go right ahead. You can even use wool. And now I have the fun part of designing the actual cactus. I like to start with the pot, and I'm going for a terracotta feel here. It doesn't have to be terracotta, and you can use any beautiful fabric that you like or any color. You can even stitch it. You don't even have to use fabric collage. But I'm going to use this beautiful print here. And I want my bowl, my planter, to maybe be a half moon shape. So I'm just going to cut out a rectangle approximately of the size, because I can always cut it back further. And then with the wrong side, I'm just going to really very simply create half of that shape. So I kind of like that, and maybe have a little pedestal on the bottom. Just makes it interesting for it to stand on. So then I'll fold my fabric in half so I can get a somewhat symmetrical shape, and I'll just cut that out. And you can use any size shape you like. I just happen to like this shape for this particular project. But again, it's completely subjective to whatever you like. So therefore I have my planter, and now I get to play with creating the shape of that cactus. For me, it was very simple. This was the best pink I had for making the fruit, the pears, the prickly pears for the cactus. But when it came to choosing the fabric for the actual cactus itself, those paddles, I had a tough time deciding. So I pulled out a bunch of my greens, and this is the same fabric that I just tea-dyed. It gives it a more subtle effect, more like sun bleached from the desert, but I think I really want to go with the bolder look. So I'll set all these aside and just use the colors that I want. Now they're pretty bold. Some people might say garish, but I kind of like that. So now I'm just going to sketch on the back the approximate size and the number of little paddles of cactus that I want. So I'll start with maybe 2 larger ones that will be coming up from the pot. And then I'll make maybe a few smaller ones that I'll incorporate, and maybe even a smaller one here. I'll cut those out and play with the design process before I start cutting out the pear. So now I have all my shapes cut out, And now I'll design how I want them to be in the planter. So I'll just kind of play around with it, get a feel for the different way it's going to look. And I think that's good. I have an extra one. I can either tuck it in here. Yeah, I kind of like that. So now I have my main cactus made of simple shapes. They're not perfect. Some are a little wobbly. I have my planter. And now I just want that beautiful colored little prickly pears. So I'm just going to cut a small piece of fabric. And these are just going to be oval shapes. So I'll cut the fabric in half. And I'll just cut some oval shapes from it. So there I have some oval shapes to play with to see if I want to make them, to see where I want to put them. So I'll just put a few here. I can even put them on top. So there I have the design for my cactus. I can play around with where I want it on the fabric. Maybe I'll move it up just a little bit. What I'm going to do is take a little glue stick here. This is just a fabric glue stick, but you can use a glue stick designed for paper because we're only going to use a small amount of it. I'm just going to take it and put a teeny little bit on the back of the fabric pieces and then tack them down. Now the piece is only tacked down very minorly, just enough so that it won't really flop around when I go to use it, and I will still pin it in place. But for now, I just want to get a little bit of help holding it in place. So now when designing this piece, the one thing I like to keep in mind is, because I'm using such bold colors, is this negative space. The space in between all these fabric shapes is very interesting, and it can become an element in itself. Now here I don't have any fabric collage on the back of this one because I think all these interesting little shapes and curves and intersections really make the piece quite intriguing. What I like to do now, I have all my pins facing downward, so I'll flip my piece over and I'll start to stitch it down. I'll start with the pot here, and what I'll do is start at one end, right in the corner up top, and I'm just going to do a straight stitch. So I'll just make a small little stitch, and I'll continue this all the way around the perimeter of this pot. Now I do have an interesting design element with that bottom here, the little pedestal, so I can either go all the way around it, or I can stitch around it, creating that half circle, and then stitch around the pedestal. And I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'll stitch all the way around, and when I get to the pedestal, I'll show you what I mean. So there, I've stitched around the bowl of the planter here, this round shape. And now I'm going to bring up my stitches here and stitch around the perimeter of this little pedestal that it rests on. Again, this is where the design element comes into play, and depending on the size and the shape of the planter that you make, you can get different effects. You just play with the opportunities that arise from the different shapes and the different patterns in your fabric that you're using. That's always an interesting process because it makes it very original and very unique to you as you're creating it. Now I'm using 4 strands of embroidery floss here. I like the thick look of 6, but I didn't want all that texture. Just enough to make it interesting. So I'm going to flip it over, knot off my thread, and then we'll start the next part of our stitching. So now in a way to remove the pins as I go and avoid being pricked by them, I'm going to start by stitching the little fruit here, the pears. I have my thread that matches that fabric color very nicely, and I'm just going to stitch teeny little stitches every so often on the pieces here. I'm trying to create just a little bit of a shadow on the piece and hold it down in place. So after I have 2 or 3 stitches, can remove that pin and just finish stitching that pear. Now there are many ways you can do this to add texture, but I was going by a little bit of the anatomy of the fruit that's here. And I just thought it was an interesting effect, especially since I know I'm going to stitch the whiskers on the greenery. So that's one of the prickly pears. I'll stitch the remainder and show you how it looks. So there I've stitched all of the prickly pears down. I have the planter stitched, and now I want to add stitches that will hold the actual cactus, these little paddle-shaped pieces, in place. But instead of stitching around them as a border or just tacking them down, I'm going to stitch those spines. And those spines kind of go in all directions, away from the cactus. So I'll start here at the bottom, and I'll come in just a little bit, and I'll stitch a spine. Now I'm using a thinner black thread here to make those little spines. And when I go on the inside of the cactus, I'm just going to stitch a short little mark. Again, they're all emanating out from the center of the cactus outward of each of the pieces. Once I have a few of the stitches down, I can remove that pin, and then I'll just continue to stitch. And when I stitch on the edge of the individual paddle, that's when I can bring it outside and cross over onto this fabric, this background fabric. Some people like to go all the way around first and then add the filler stitches, so you can do whatever works for you. I like to definitely start with my largest paddle, and then I can work my way around. And again, depending on the number of stitches that you stitch and the look that you're going for, you might not need very many. The fabric winds up being tacked down in position, and it starts to resemble a prickly pear cactus. So again, I make my short little stitches on the inside, always going towards the outside or up, and then I stitch around, coming right off the cactus. And it's kind of a cartoon version, so I don't need it to be accurate. I don't need to have as many as a real cactus, just enough to give the feel of that sharp spine. I'll continue doing this with all of the cactus pieces and show you the result. So I've stitched all the little spines that I want onto these cactus, and I have my prickly pear cactus complete. Now, of course, you can go around and embellish your piece further with additional stitches, some fabric, maybe some ribbon trim. I'm going to leave this like it is, and I'll have a collection of these large cactuses that I can put into a little book. So that's how I create a prickly pear cactus. It's a really fun technique because I incorporate fabric as well as stitches to produce a result that's reminiscent of that prickly pear cactus. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. The next cactus video will feature the string of pearls cactus, and that takes advantage of some beautiful stitches that we'll have, and that'll be my next video that I release. Thanks for joining me today.